As I mentioned, I set up a still life at home, and the theme is maybe you're going to relax and have a glass of wine and enjoy some fruit. And meanwhile, you've got this pretty bouquet of flowers. These are sunflowers, but they're not the kind, obviously, with the dark center. They have a lighter center. And I wanted that because I didn't want the sunflowers to dominate. If I wanted a picture of the ones with the dark, that would be fine, but they would be the dominant element of the painting. And then I've got the blue vase, which is one of my favorite vases. I always feel like I have to have something blue in my pictures. I don't know why. It's my favorite color. Maybe that's why. Then this is pink. In the photograph reference, it's almost a salmon color pink, but it is actually a pale pink. Okay, I'm going to start by mixing a background color. And then right after that, I'm going to mix the most intense color that'll go against that background, which is really the yellow in the flowers. So I'm mixing them on a palette that is it's almost so old, it's not falling apart, but it's a piece of wood that you buy and you season it with linseed oil. And linseed oil is the oil that's contained in the pigments. So this one's old. I like it. I use it more than any other. I have several other palettes. And the easel itself, this one is a French easel, which I use mainly for outdoor use. It's also called a julienne. It folds up into like a box, and it's easy to carry. At home, I have a larger easel, but I, of course, could not bring that down here. It's very large. So go ahead and start mixing this background color. I've got a bit of the ultramarine blue, a bit of cobalt blue, and I grabbed some of this black that I used for the other demonstration. So I'm just mixing them up together. I'm going to grab a little tiny bit of titanium buff so that it'll have more of a gray color. And I've got some of this OMS here for thinning it out. It's a little too blue, so here we go with more of the dark. This is one of my favorite aspects of painting with oils, is mixing. I don't know, there's just something about it that I like. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I use oils, although I do like the results too. So now I'm going to test this out with this large brush. I'm going to wet the brush and then just test this out. This, by the way, this little cup fastens onto the palette, and later I really use it with linseed oil. But for now, because I want something fairly thin, I'm using it to hold some of the solvent. So I'll start up here and trying to put this, oops. I just went into the image and I don't want that to happen. So I've got a little tool that potters use, but more and more oil painting people use it too. I don't know what it's called, but I call it a scraper. It's got a little point and another little point, and it's just kind of handy to wipe out something that you don't want. So this is kind of a grayish, dark grayish background color. Oh, and I'm using the hog bristle number 10 or 8. I just can't remember which color, which size it is. And I'm putting this on very, very thinly. And I may end up just keeping it thin. And I'm going to then mix up some yellow for the flower. But I need to wipe off my palette knife. I'm going to put in the yellow of the flower just to show how the contrast will be. But normally, I paint back to front. When I took my first oil painting class, I lived in Chicago then, and the instructor gave us 4 things. He said, paint back to front, dark to light, thin to thick. Actually, it was 3 things, thin to thick. So you start with a layer of thin, and then you can, work it up to be a little thicker. So I'm starting with the background here, and I'm going to make the yellow that's going to be contrasting. I might even be able to use pure pigment, which is very rare, but we'll see how that's going to look. I am going to lighten it a little bit. I'm still using the OMS to thin it out a little bit. And I'm taking the brush that is the sable brush, Mimic Sable, and I'm just going to stick this in right up here. Checking my picture to see if it looks like it matches, and I think it does. It'll be a little thicker in a bit. I'm going to go ahead and work on the background a lot more. Well, I've gone ahead and done a lot of the background. And I'm still doing it. As I mentioned, I like to paint back to front. And it also helps to define the objects in the still life. Speaking of the objects in the still life, my process for this one, and for most, is I start out with a lot of things. I think about what do I want to convey. So I wanted to convey, say, relaxing after work maybe, having a glass of wine, and I even thought about maybe putting a glass of whiskey, but I didn't. So I had a whole bunch of things. I had the wine bottle, I had a hunk of cheese, and I had some crackers, I had more fruit, I had a little cute jar that we have at home, and I just kind of took a lot of photographs of it. Some people draw them, but I didn't do that then. So by eliminating, I finally found a composition that I liked, that I thought would be a good one. And you just have to play around. You have to have something that you think is pleasing. And a lot of times doing a drawing helps with that very much, especially if it's something that's detailed. Sometimes I'll do several little sketches, thumbnails that are like, say, 3 by 3 or 2 by 4, or depending on the shape of what I want. 2 by 2, just with, showing the objects. Other times I do that plus a detailed drawing in pencil, graphite. This time I didn't do that. I thought my phone camera had captured the composition the way I liked it. And I've been using the phone camera more and more because you can go in and you can crop it. So it's just an easy way to do it. But drawing it out is good too, especially if you have something that's very detailed. Also, it helps your general art ability. If you could do even a little sketch, even a 10-minute sketch every day. I know sometimes that's not practical. I'm continuing to put in this background. I've got a smaller brush, one of the this Mimic Sable. I'm just going to call them Sable, even though they're Mimic, just quicker to say. But because I want to get something, into these spots in between the petals. But then I'll go to the bigger brush for the larger areas. So now I'm using my hog bristle brush, my large one, which is the same one I used earlier, just to get a lot of this covered very quickly. I had to stop and remix background paint And one of the things that's difficult is to get your color to be what you had before. So you just have to kind of try to remember what you used and do your best to get it the same. And if it isn't quite the same, you can kind of blend it like this. But, it's almost like a trial by error kind of thing for remixing. The better thing is to mix enough to begin with. But that's kind of sometimes difficult too. So I'm going to take the smaller one and get into these little tighter areas. And I'm looking over to my reference photo. Make sure I've got everything right. You find that you almost can paint using other things besides a brush sometimes, like a palette knife. Just now I used my little scraper to kind of blend that in where the orange is going to go. Sometimes people even use their fingers, and I've done that too. My fingers are always gloved for protection. Don't want to be poisoned. And this can be gone over if I find that I've got any spots that are too pale or something. When I look at it, I can go back over it because it's very thin. That's the nice thing about oil, is that you can paint over it. Although you have to be careful, because if you paint over it too much, you damage the longevity of the painting. It can crack later. That's if you go over with thin. The rule of thumb is fat over lean, so meaning thick paint over thin paint. This is pretty thin right now. And I've just about got that background in. I'm going to wash out the brush with the solvent, but I'll try to remember that that was a brush that was used for dark.